Hello everyone, so we are solving March 2018 variant 2 today. This is the MCQ paper and this is the latest paper which I recommend everyone to solve. The first question says, which statement about economics is not correct? So the answer for this one is basically D, which says the value of a good or service involves a purely objective judgment, because when you look at a value of a good, it is not objective or normative. It could also be judged through a positive manner. What do we mean by this? Basically, that can we find the value of a good? And the answer is yes, we can find the value of a good. Can we find the value of the good accurately? And the answer is yes, we can. The price of a good is the value of a good in a market. So that's why it's not correct that whenever you look at a value of a good, it's purely objective. It could also be, it could also be completely assessed through the value of the good, which is the price. Why are other statements wrong? So the first one says economic actions can produce unexpected results, and the answer is yes. These are called negative externalities or positive externalities that can come about because of any transaction. B says economic thinking is usually based on logical reasoning at the margin, and yes, when we look at decisions are made at the margin. We look at marginal benefit and marginal cost of a decision. The third one says, or C says, the use of scarce resources to produce a good always has a cost, and the answer is yes, there will be a cost. We call that opportunity cost of using resources. So even C is wrong. Question number 2 says the farmer is able to grow 3 crops, X, Y, and Z on his land. The farmer decides to grow at most 2 crops in any year. The table shows 6 possible combinations of units of output of the crops, of the 3 crops. So in this question, if you see how we read the table, so if you grow X and only X, you can make 80 of it, because you don't like Y and Z, you're making nothing. But let's say if you make X and Y, then the combination you have is this one, which is 40 of X and 30 of Y. But if you decide to grow X and Z, that's 40 and 20, this combination. Okay. On the other hand, if you decide to grow Y and Z, that's this combination. So they're asking what is the opportunity cost of 1 unit of X? And so we can see this, the answer would be C, because 1 unit of X is equal to 0.5 of Z. How do I get that? Look at this. When they say 40x is equal to 20Z, that automatically means 1x is equal to half Z. So that's why the right answer is C, which is 0.5 units of Z. The diagram shows the production possibility curve for an economy that produces capital goods and consumer goods. So why is the production possibility curve drawn concave to the origin? Concave to the origin curve, which looks like this rather than a linear curve. A concave to the origin curve has this assumption that there is an increasing opportunity cost, which means that every time I get more of consumer goods for less of capital goods, which means every time I'm traveling from, let's say, point A towards point B, which means more of consumer goods and less of capital goods, the sacrifice in terms of capital goods get bigger and bigger. And this logic is simply that some resources are more efficient in the production of some goods than the other. Because we're not equally good at making both goods, the opportunity cost is not linear, it's actually concave to the origin, which means that there are times when we are sacrificing some of capital goods for more of consumer goods by using those resources which are not truly ideal for consumer goods, but because we need more consumer goods, we end up sacrificing it. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives is a branch of the United States government which regulates markets. What does its name imply is most likely to be the main responsibility? Well, clearly when you have alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosive in one sentence, this means that it is all what we call economic bads, and therefore they must be harming the society. We call such economic bads as demerit goods. So to prevent harm from demerit goods, you have these kinds of departments. In question 5, they say what is treated as a variable in constructing a market demand curve. Remember, market demand curve shows you a relationship between price and quantity. So clearly, we are making the price of the good as a variable. Variable basically means that it's a factor that changes. Remember, when we are making a demand curve, we say when the price of a good goes down, the quantity demanded goes up, keeping everything else constant. So everything else is set as parables: the taste, the distribution of income, the price of related goods. What is a variable would be the price of the good itself. Number 6 is about the income elasticity of demand. It says that which diagram shows how the quantity demanded for 4 goods changes as income changes. Which good has an income elasticity of demand which is always positive 1. Positive 1 income elasticity of demand means percentage change in quantity demanded is equal to percentage change in income, which would mean that the percentage change is equal, and that's why YD is equal to 1, and the answer would be C. Look at this. Every time there's a change in income, there will be a change in quantity demanded. This line, which is coming from the origin, would have a slope of x equals to y or x equals to 2y, and that means that every time there's an increase of income of, let's say, for example, 10%, there will be a change in, for example, quantity demanded of 10%, then this relationship will stay constant, will not change. So that's why the right answer would be C. In question 7, they gave us price and quantity supplied of 2 goods, X and Y, and they're saying that which statement about price elasticity supply is correct. Well, this requires a lot of solving, but if you look at this one, the answer is D, and the reason is that when the price goes from 40 to 50, that's 25% increase. You will see the quantity supplied is also going up by 64 to 80, which is also a 25% increase. How do I get 25%? Well, simply 80 minus 64 over 64 times 100, that's the quantity change, divided by 50 minus 40, new minus old, over 40 times 100. That's my PES. Remember, PES is percentage change in quantity supplied over percentage change in price. So when the price of Y goes from 40 to 50, that's a 25% increase. You will see the quantity supplied for Y will go up from 64 to 80. That's also 25% increase, which would mean the PES of Y would be equal to 1, and that's why the right answer is D. In question 8, they say that in 2016, car drivers bought more fuel gas because the price of oil from which it was made had fallen. Which diagram represents this change in the market for fuel? So what is happening is this, that people are buying more of fuel because it's becoming cheaper. So there must be a reduction in the cost of production. So the right answer for this one would be D, because in D what is happening is there's a supply curve shifting to the right. A shift of supply curve to the right would mean cost of production is going down, and because of this increase in supply, the price has gone down, which is basically making car drivers buy more of fuel. In 9, they're saying that the market demand for a product is made up of demand for 3 firms. So you have 3 firms demand, and then you have market supply, and they're asking what is the equilibrium price. For the equilibrium price, quantity demanded must be equal to quantity supplied. So the answer is 9, where 2800 plus 2500 plus 2900 is equal to 8200. So market demand, which is equal to demand for good X and Y and Z, is equal to market supply, and that happens at $9. Question number 10 is similar to question number 9. It says that the diagram represents the market for diamonds. The supply curve for diamonds is shifting backward, which means cost of production must be going up. And the answer is D. Therefore, a rise in the wages of diamond miners results in the supply curve to shift backward because it's becoming expensive to produce them. In question number 11, they say that good X has a substitute, good Y, and a complement good Z. The price of good Y decreases and the price of good Z increases. Why might the equilibrium price of good X remain unchanged? So in this case, when the price of good Y is decreasing, we notice that the demand for X should also go down. Why? Because if X and Y are substitute and Y is becoming cheaper, then clearly X will find the fall of demand because they are what we call in competitive demand. At the same time, Z is a substitute to good X. So that would mean basically if the price of Z is increasing, people will buy less of X because they are complementary goods, which means they are jointly consumed. So therefore demand for X will also go down because of the fact that good X and Z are complements and Z is becoming expensive. The question is asking us why might the equilibrium price for good X remains unchanged, and the reason why it could happen could be because of the factor C, or answer choice C, which says some firms stop production of good X. Now why do I say that? Look at this. If I make a diagram here, demand and supply, and let's say because of the factors that I mentioned, which is substitute becoming cheaper and complement becoming expensive, let's say demand for X is going down, then the price should fall. But if at the same time firms are stopping to produce good X, there is a possibility that there will be a fall in supply as well. The fall in demand and a fall in supply would mean the price can remain unchanged. So the right answer is C. In question 12, it says at first a television service is available at no charge. So there is no price for the television service. The television company then charges viewers $6 per hour to watch its program. The demand curve is this. So when there is no price, the price is zero. They're asking us what is the value of the loss of consumer surplus and what is the value of consumer surplus. What value of consumer surplus remains after the introduction of the hourly charge. So basically the idea is this, that before the consumer surplus would be area under the demand curve of the price. The price was zero when there was no price. The consumer surplus would be this area A plus this area B and C. So all the area under the triangle would be consumer surplus before. After the $6 price, the consumer surplus will be only area A. Why? Because the market price is $6. Area under the demand curve above the market price would be this area A. So let's find out the total consumer surplus first. Total consumer surplus will be this triangle area. So consumer surplus, let's call this before versus after. So before would be half times 5,000 times 10. So yes, the area of the triangle would be half into base into height. So that would be equal to 25,000, right? Then comes basically what's the consumer surplus after. Consumer surplus after would be basically half times this is the base 2000 times 10 minus 6, which is 4. So half times 2000 into 4, which would be equal to 1000. So the question is asking us what's the consumer surplus after, or remaining consumer surplus. Remaining consumer surplus would be, so this is 4,000 because 1000 times 4 is 4,000. Yeah. What's the consumer surplus after? Consumer surplus after would be, of course, 4,000. And consumer surplus before was 25,000. So what is the loss of consumer surplus? Consumer surplus loss would be 25,000 minus 4,000 or 21,000. So So the answer would be C. Question 13 is about producer surplus. It says the diagram shows the European airline market. The new entrants have come to the market, shifting the supply curve from S1 to S2. So supply curve shifting backward, which means that the price has gone up. Now, what is producer surplus? Producer surplus is area under the market price above the supply curve. So, what is the producer surplus before? And the answer would be H and K. H and K would be the producer surplus before, because it's the area under the market price above the supply curve. With the new supply curve being S1, the producer surplus would be GMJ. So, which area represents the new producer surplus? And the answer would be A, which is GMJ, which is going to be this area under the market price above the new supply curve. In number 14, they say that which benefit is most likely to result from a rise in the minimum price of labor. So when you put a minimum wage is put above equilibrium. So this is my demand and supply. You put a minimum wage above equilibrium like this. That's called this WMIN. A minimum wage results in basically unemployment of Q2 minus Q1, as labor is asking for, or labor is paid higher than the equilibrium. Now, when you increase this minimum wage, you are causing unemployment to rise. So clearly, C would be wrong, because C is saying a reduction in the level of unemployment, which means unemployment is going down when the unemployment is actually going up. But because people are paid probably better, one could say there could be a reduction in the income inequality. People who are paid more will find their gap between the rich and the poor to go down. So B is the best answer. In question 15, this is the diagram shows the equilibrium price and quantity of good X. The initial market equilibrium is shown by point E. So this is the initial market equilibrium. What might cause the market equilibrium to move to point F? So if the market equilibrium is moving to point F, the only way it can happen is by supply curve shifting backward, right? So if the supply curve shifts backward, this will be basically new equilibrium. Supply curve only shifts backward when there is a rise in the cost of production, and if that's the case, then D will be the answer, which is the imposition of a specific sales tax on producers of good X that result in supply curve to shift backward. In 16, they're giving us a demand and supply curve, and they're saying that there's a subsidy of $4. The government is giving a subsidy of $4, and they're saying they're assuming that any extra sales are to new consumers. How much do the original consumers of the product save as a result of subsidy? So the way we go about doing these kind of questions is always to make demand and supply diagram. So I'm going to make initial demand supply diagram, D naught and S naught, and I'm going to find out the equilibrium before. The equilibrium before is basically where this quantity demanded is equal to this quantity supplied, and that is happening at 150. Look at this, at 150, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, and the price is 10. So at price of $10, quantity demanded is 150, quantity supplied is also 150. So this is before. After, what happens is this, that when you put a subsidy of a $4, supply curve will shift to the right. Now the price isn't going to be $6, but the price will fall, and the price will be between this distance A and B. So subsidy is the vertical distance. So let me just mark this as $6. So what's the new price? And well, look at this. With the new supply curve being this one, S1, this 200 and this 200 is equal. So the new supply curve is meeting the demand curve at $8. Makes sense? So now the new quantity is basically 200. Now what the question is saying is that this extra quantity is now bought by the new consumers. So this 50 is bought by new consumers, but the original consumers, which were who were buying 150, are now finding the price to move from 10 to 8. So they save $2 for the 150 that they were buying, which means it's 2 times 150, which means they are saving $300. So A is the right answer. In question number 17, they say which statement about transfer payments is correct. So what are transfer payments? Transfer payments are those payments for which no output is produced in return. So like, for example, if the government gives any payment to any worker but it doesn't require any output in return, that's transfer payment. A good example of transfer payment would be probably the social security payments or welfare payments or even unemployment benefits that the government gives you. One of the biggest problems of transfer payments is C, which is that transfer payments may result in disincentive to work. And the reason why they result in disincentive to work is because people, when they realize that they have unemployment benefits, they may not actively search for a job. So that's why C is the right answer. In number 18, it says, what is the major problem associated with the government directly providing the correct amount of public good? And the answer is B. And the reason is simply because public goods are non-rival, non-excludable, which means the people are not willing to pay for the goods, which means that if there is no willingness to pay, then there is definitely no demand for these goods. Number 19 says an aggregate demand curve slows downward from left to right, which means that AD curve is like this, which results in something like this to happen. When the price level goes down from P0 to P1, your real GDP goes up. In other words, your purchasing power goes up, which results in people to have a higher ability to buy goods. And that's exactly what C is saying, that when the price level goes down, there will be an increase in the real value of money balances. B is wrong. When there is an increase in price level, we see interest rates to actually fall. So that's why C is the right answer. In number 20, they say in the diagram, the economy is initially in equilibrium at point X. The government increases spending on education. This coincides with an increase in wage rate inflation. So basically what is happening is that if we have a aggregate demand and aggregate supply curve, now with the increase in wage rate costs or wage rate inflation, supply curve will shift backward. So an increase in wage rate inflation results in SRAS to shift backward. At the same time, government is increasing spending. So AD is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. So G goes up, AD goes up. So where will be a new equilibrium? And the answer is C. In 21, they said during 1 year, the national output of a country valued in terms of money prices increased by 8%. So MV is equal to PT. They're saying that the value of the output in real terms increased by 8%. So PT increased by 8%. While the index of the prices of all goods and services produced in the country increased by 3%. So the your sort of prices are going up by, let me use this, prices are going up by 3%. So that would mean 8 minus 3 T, or your real national output must be going up by 5%. So B is the right answer. In 22, they say the table shows the CPI rate of inflation in the US from 2006 to 2013. If you can see this, the rate is positive throughout. So throughout this time, because the rate of inflation is positive, the prices are rising. What can be concluded from the figures about the period 2006 to 2013? And the answer is there were 8 years of rising living costs. And the reason is simply because as long as the inflation is positive, prices are rising. Prices are rising, which means inflation is taking place. Sometimes at a slower rate, sometimes at a faster rate, but it is still taking place. In 23, they say that in 2014, Australia and China negotiated a trade agreement. This removed Chinese tariffs on 95% of Australian exports, which means that Australia is getting greater access to China in terms of able to sell their goods in China in exchange for greater access to Australian economy for Chinese investors. So Australia is allowing Chinese investors to invest in Australia. So what will that do? Well, current account of Australia will improve, so therefore greater inflow of the current account, because now they are able to sell more exports. At the same time, the financial account will also see a greater inflow, and the reason is simply because a lot of money will flow into the country from China, where Chinese investors will be investing in Australia. So A is the right answer. In question 24, they say that Turkey can produce a good but also import some of the good from Egypt. The Turkish currency depreciates against the Egyptian currency. How is this most likely to affect production of this good in Egypt and in Turkey? So if Turkish currency is depreciating, exports of Turkey will become cheaper. So clearly production in Turkey will increase. So it can be B or D. At the same time, because Turkish currency is depreciating, imports will become expensive. So Egyptian sort of production should decrease because Turkey may not want to buy it from Egypt, which is now expensive after depreciation. So the best answer is B. In question number 25, they say the table shows the terms of trade for Saudi Arabia. Terms of trade is simply index of export prices, so PX, over index of import prices, PM. And you can see that in the table, the terms of trade is continuously improving for Saudi Arabia, which means export prices must be rising faster than import prices. So the best answer would be A. In 26, they say what is present in a custom union but not in a free trade area. So what is present in a custom union is a common external tariff with the rest of the world. But in a free trade area, countries may not have tariff with each other, but they may have a different trade policy with other countries. But if you are part of custom union, you have a common trade policy with other countries which are non-members as well. Number 27 says, which argument in favor of protectionism is generally regarded as economically valid? Is not generally regarded. So not means that it's not a valid argument, and clearly A is the right answer. When you are protecting, the standard of living can go down because the high quality imports will now be expensive. So clearly it does not increase standard of living. In question 28, it says, which action is classified as a fiscal policy measure? Well, fiscal policy measure is simply when the government is changing either G or T. So B is the right answer, which is managing changes in the level of government debt. Because if the government is changing debt, then this means they're changing their spending. The government spending will change. Also, taxation can also have an implication, because if you are changing the level of government debt, you might need to tax more or tax less. In 29, they say a country has a deficit on the current account of the balance of payment. Which policy would be expected to increase the deficit? If there is a deficit in the current account of the balance of payment, and if we appreciate the currency, then that results in exports to become expensive, imports to become cheaper, and that may cause X minus M to actually fall, which means it will increase the deficit. So A is the right answer. Which type of policy would have the most immediate effect in dealing with the deflation economic downturn? So if there's a deflation economic downturn, AT is falling. And if the government decides to increase liquidity by assisting banks to lend more, that basically means that there will be higher money supply, which in turn would mean aggregate demand will rise. Remember, when banks are lending, giving more loans, that results in people to be able to buy more through money that is being lent to them. So B is the right answer.